Oh, it says it right there, means a business or nonprofit organization. Okay. Volunteer safety officer means an individual who provides service and volunteer under the supervision of the agency, and at the time the individual provides the services to the supervising agency described, the individual is exercising peace office authority as provided in section 53. You have your sheriff's office provide services. Do you pay them for those services? Yes and no, both ways. Now, it's a little bit tricky there, because under FLSA, can you have someone volunteer to do the same job without paying them? No, you can't. And again, that's one I'd run by my personnel director, but that's a tricky part of it. That's hard to get an exception. And you know, when it comes up, they volunteered for the last 5 years, and they say, well, I wasn't really volunteering. I thought you should have paid me, but I was afraid you'd can me if I didn't volunteer. And then they sue you, and Johnny says, what the hey is going on here? You do better than that, because Dave Wilson told them not to do that. You go to your county attorney and check with them. But that's a critical one. Under Fair Labor Standards Act, you can't volunteer for the same type of work you do. And there are some exceptions given in there for emergency situations, but I don't think there's an exception for fairs and stuff like that. Okay, compensatory service workers, we're going to skip that one. You don't use them in your fairs, do you? Might not be a good thing to have inmates over running. Workers' compensation benefits, we're going to skip. Search and rescue, we're going to skip.
Wait, why search and rescue?
You want to do search and rescue?
Yes.
Okay. Workers' compensation benefits for volunteer search and rescue team members. These were things, I think you worked on the legislation, didn't you, Johnny, in getting this in place? I was opposed to it. I don't want to pay for search and rescue. But has it increased premiums at all? Have we had any claims yet?
Yeah, it will increase premiums, and that was my discussion with the sheriffs, because this was really pushed by the sheriffs that they wanted to be able to provide.
Oh, I'm faulting you for it. It wasn't you. You were responding to the needs of the sheriffs.
Well, I just simply let the sheriffs know that it will increase the costs of workers' compensation, because you're paying those people a higher benefit that they haven't been provided for in the past. And as long as the sheriffs were comfortable in paying more to get that coverage, and
Like the sheriffs paying more.
you can give it to them.
Sorry, editorial comment. I better phrase that. The sheriff's not.
But they have limited it, through their discussions with me, they did limit it. Originally it was that search and rescue people, anytime they're injured, if they're a search and rescue person, they're gonna get the full workers' compensation benefits, not just the medical benefits that they used to get. So if they're doing search and rescue, or if they're training for search and rescue, and they get injured, and now they can't go back to their day job as a brain surgeon, the county's going to pay them their lost wages for being a brain surgeon. That's pretty darn expensive. And I actually had that claim happen to me in Minnesota.
Really?
Search and rescue volunteer that was a brain surgeon. Got beat over the head with a flashlight by the person they were searching for, and was out of work for months. Cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for his lost wages. But the sheriffs agreed, and the statute actually says that the only time they're going to get these extra benefits is when they're actually searching and rescuing. Not when they're training, not when they're at the fair doing security as part of their because they're part of the search and rescue team, not running the search and rescue team hot dog stand at the fair, only when they're searching and rescuing.
And all of these are the balance of what we think is right and rewarding people who are willing to go out and spend their time doing these kinds of things versus what's it going to cost the taxpayer in the end. And sometimes I get a little frustrated with people that are climbing mountains and end up in the middle of the night and search and rescue goes out and somebody gets injured and the taxpayer has to pay for them. But for every risk that we take on, there's got to be compensation and there's a balance side to that, right? It's like Obamacare when my son says, well, I get to stay on your insurance for 2 more years. I said, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that's an increased cost. We're kidding ourselves if we don't think insurance companies add that as an increased risk and take that on. So any questions on search and rescue? Did Johnny answer it for you? If you read through that statute, they do get higher benefits than a normal volunteer would get. Normal volunteer, yes, sir.
Not on search and rescue, can you go back to inmates? Because
Yes.
there's a couple of us that use inmates during the fair.
Okay,
They do our garbage pickup.
do they? Well, they would still be what? They're not going to be classified as volunteers, are they? They're still going to be classified as, what is it called?
Compensatory service.
Yes. And so, yes, you will have, and we have them go out, what we call our work crews, our jail work crews, that go out and do community service. And once in a while, they need some stitches when they get in fight, when they use some piece of equipment that they weren't, just made a mistake. And just in the course of life, you have those injuries, and we pay those medical benefits. Okay, so, any other questions on that? So you use it in your fair quite a bit, is that what it's experiencing? Slave labor? I'm waiting for that lawsuit someday. They get paid a very minimal amount. Yeah. But it goes on their book, right? And they get to buy candy or something, so. All right. We are on page 9. Here is one of the most important things I can emphasize today, and I think John told me to too. Section 4, the volunteer may not donate any service to an agency unless the volunteer services are approved by who? The chief executive of that agency. County is an agency. It's going to be your county commission if you have a commission. You have a county manager form of government, might be the county manager. Or his authorized representative. And you may consider that, because sometimes you need volunteers in a quick hurry, and you may want to have somebody that's going to be around more, not that your councils or commissions are gone, but it may, or you could do an alternative, in my opinion, and authorize two, so that you can get that approval in place. And by the Office of Personnel having jurisdiction, I didn't like the term over that agency. I prefer the association with that agency. But you're going to have to get that volunteer approved. And I have recommended to our Human Resources Director many times that he develop a volunteer application. I think we have it, you guys use it, and then it's submitted, and then that volunteer is covered. And I would make the volunteer aware, not so that we increase claims, but the reason you're doing that, and if you do some training, and I'd recommend you do some training for that they are aware that they are a volunteer now, an official volunteer, and they have certain coverage, liability coverage. People are more willing to give service. I mean, this is a service state, and there's service people everywhere in the United States and through the world, but it's helpful to know that if you make an error, you're covered in that process, that you're not going to lose your home or your snowmobiles or your boat, as Johnny said. Any questions on that? That is the one thing, if you don't do anything else when you go back to your counties today, I would make sure there's a process, that those are on file somewhere. I'd call my HR director and say, do you have these on file? Can you send me a list in this day of computers? They ought to be able to send you a list of the volunteers that you had approved. Now, it doesn't say how often, Johnny, so I'm assuming that that's good forever.
Yeah, and that's why you want to have that process so that you put people on the list, that they're a volunteer, and either identify when you place them on the list how long they're on the list, or that each year you're also going back and taking people off the list. Because otherwise people can come back and say, well, hey, I was authorized as a volunteer in 1986, and I was at the fair this year, and I bent over, I was going to move the garbage can a little bit for you, and you don't even know who this person is anymore, and now they've injured themselves and they want coverage because they were a volunteer and you've never taken them off the books. If your personnel department is running their volunteer programs according to the DHR wish list, they have the fair identified as a specific volunteer program, and they have that split up that the fair is a program each year. So those volunteers would be volunteer to the fair for the year. When the fair is over for the year, that program ends, as well as all the volunteers to it. but you want to review that with your personnel department and see how they set.
Do you want to take them off? What if they're a repetitive volunteer for the fair? Would you recommend still taking them off?
You don't need to, but again, I like to see that you're identifying what their duties and responsibilities are as a volunteer to the fair, so that they don't think that they're just a free will volunteer and can do anything for the county anytime they want because they went through this application process for the fair. And so when they show up and they decide that they're gonna plant some flowers outside the courthouse, and while they do that, they grab a rake and hit some kid in the head, and now you've got an injury to a small child, and they're claiming, well, I'm a volunteer, county has to pay for the liability lawsuit against this kid, and the county never asked them to come and plant flowers at the courthouse. So you want to control that by when you authorize them specifically for certain duties at the fair, so that you limit the scope of when you're going to be required to provide their defense.
Well, I guess if they wanted to, they could limit and say we're approving you as a volunteer through the end of the fair period or something.
And if it is a long
Before
term,
and after,
they
something like
volunteer every year over and over again, you can say, and you'll continue to be an authorized volunteer until such time as we remove you from the list.
So I guess your own best judgment's good on that. Yes, ma'am.
We actually issue them a volunteer ID card that they wear during the fair, and then we gather them back up after the fair.
I think that's a great idea.
Let them know, okay, we recognize you as a volunteer, but when you're done, you give us the card back, and then next year we'll look at it again.
Great suggestion in my opinion. Okay?
One more thing, what about community service? Do they need to fill out some form like volunteer?
For jail inmates?
No,
Oh, community service?
for kids who's left school and the judge sends them out to you to babysit.
No, I'm not.
I think they'd still be considered one of those compensatory service workers, the way with the broadness of that definition. And again, that's what they are. You don't need to specify that they're a volunteer. They're already a compensatory service worker, and the statute spells out how they're going to be.
Because there's paperwork on them somewhere, like a judge or a court record or something.
Right.
Yeah, interesting question. Incarceration, plea, sentence, immersion, probation, and parole. So maybe we ought to look at the statute and broaden that in some way too, a little bit, to include that. For now, I think, and when people say, well, isn't there a correct answer, I always say, Supreme Court goes 5-4 a lot of times. And they're all smart people with a lot of time to decide. So I would operate under that concept for now.
The real question is do you want to take care of their medical expenses if they get injured while they're doing
I
work
would
for
want
you?
them out their periods most of the time.
Yeah, and would you want to have to defend them in a lawsuit if they hurt someone else or discriminate against someone else, harass someone else?
So
If you want those things, then make them a volunteer.
So does the county supervise them, or are they supervised by the court personnel, or wherever?
Probably by the court personnel. They have to report back that they've completed their service. And sometimes you have to write just a little short thing saying, so-and-so has completed so many hours of community service. And they
And
take
I'm not
it
sure I
to them.
would try and interject into that one and let them take the responsibility for that, because it's like anything else. Whoever has control over the situation ought to be the one that bears the liability. And Johnny nodded on that one, just in case I misspoke. But no, it's true in life, whatever, and the same as your contract. I get so frustrated with the one-sided contract I'm getting lately, I just want to shoot people. But professional services contract, I called Johnny on one the other day, again, where they come in and say, they have the nice provisions there, we'll be responsible for our negligence and wrongdoing, you be responsible for your negligence and wrongdoing, and then it came to funding that. And remember, when somebody says that, it's only as good as their funding mechanism.